Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Jasmine Lee. As U.S.-China trade tension continue to escalate, Chinese leader Xi Jinping has embarked on a state visit to Southeast Asia, including stops in Vietnam, Malaysia, and Cambodia. The French newspaper Le Monde described Xi's trip as China's first countermeasure since President Donald Trump launched a new wave of tariffs. In response to Xi's visit with Vietnamese leaders, Trump made pointed and provocative remarks. He said, "That's a lovely meeting. They are discussing how do we screw the United States of America." Today, we look closer at how the U.S.-China trade war is shaping the Indo-Pacific geopolitical landscape, particularly in Southeast Asia. Join us today are William Stanton, former American Institute in Taiwan director, and Christina Chen, INDSR Division of Chinese Politics, Military and Warfighting Concept Assistant Research Fellow. A very warm welcome to both of you on the show. So let's begin with the three countries that Xi Jinping visited: Vietnam, Malaysia, and Cambodia, and which currently now face U.S. reciprocal tariffs of 46%, 24%, and 49%. So, Bill, my first question is to you. And China is Vietnam's largest trading partner. And during this escalating U.S.-China trade war, Xi Jinping chose Vietnam as his first stop in this trip. And he signed 45 cooperation agreements and declaring that China and Vietnam share a community of shared future. So what strategic implication could this growing China-Vietnam alignment have for the U.S.?
Well, it's a great strategic move on the part of Xi Jinping. At a time when the U.S. is imposing tariffs not only on China, but also on Vietnam, it's a natural partnership for China to go to its neighbor, Vietnam, and show support, not only as both countries suffering from U.S. sanctions, but also because China has a lot of common interests with Vietnam. So I think it was a very smart strategic move, and it sent a strong signal to Trump, and we could see that he reacted very badly to it.
Yes, we see it. And Professor Chen, how do you view Xi's approach to strengthening allies through this personal diplomacy in the height of U.S.-China trade war?
Jasmine, I agree with Bill that Xi Jinping's visit to the Southeast Asian countries is definitely a strong signal. By physically being there in those three countries, it shows the world that China indeed is interested in deepening alliances with the countries in Southeast Asia. What about the Southeast Asian countries' response? If you look at Vietnam, what happened there is that they roll out the red carpet.
Yes.
They treated Xi with the highest honor, and the local news and commentaries all emphasize strategic, traditional friendships, fraternities, camaraderies. Indications of positive relationships going on. But that's the rhetoric, and that's the display. What about the concrete actions? Well, you mentioned the 45 agreements signed.
Yes.
So far, we haven't really seen the content. What's inside those agreements. So it's possible that those agreements may be vague. And also, during the time of the events, the Vietnamese government has already shown that they are willing, they're open to negotiate with the United States. And they also pledge that they will treat or address the transshipment issue, which was of a concern to the U.S. administration. What I'm saying is that from the example of Vietnam, we see that so far the countries in Southeast Asia, they responded to Xi Jinping's call to counter the U.S. With hesitation. I think so far they are still, taking a balanced approach. They're still wait and see, to see what's going to happen. They are not really showing, a direct or obvious stance towards either side. And I think that kind of fits with, the Southeast Asians, their traditional way of, dealing with
hedging.
US. Yes, hedging and balancing. I think that shows that.
Yes, you mentioned about this balanced approach. For years, Vietnam has followed a so-called bamboo diplomacy strategy, seeking to maintain balanced tie with China and the U.S. Just as Xi concluded his visit, the U.S. immediately sent a delegation to Hanoi to discuss trade imbalance. So Bill, how would you assess the current U.S., China, and Vietnam relations?
Well, I think Vietnam, of course, has its own problems with China regarding, it's been under, so to speak, under attack in the South China Sea because of its, on what it regards as Vietnamese territory, China trying to stop the drilling for gas in those areas. There's also other territorial disputes with Vietnam. So it's interesting, actually. Vietnam really has to not only take into account, geostrategically, has to take into account the U.S. The U.S. is a useful counterpart, even as I would say probably its economy is much more dependent right now on China. So it has to balance both its relationship with China and its relationship with the United States. But clearly, both China and Vietnam would regard Trump's tariffs policies as very aggressive and punitive.
And Professor Chen, Christina, how might Vietnam's positioning influence the broader Indo-Pacific geopolitics?
First of all, I would like to echo Bill's point. I think both the U.S. and China are engaging in this very heightened tension of trade war.
Yes.
And I think both sides are exerting pressure on these countries. I mean, you mentioned the remark Trump gave, clearly very aggressive. And also Xi Jinping has indicated that if countries are deciding to cooperate with the U.S., they might face some retaliation. So I think this has put Vietnam or other countries in the region in a very difficult position.
Yes.
They are in a dilemma. We talked about how China plays an important role in those countries' economy. And Cambodia especially is heavily reliant on China for its investment, its finance, the BRI, so forth. So, it's risky for them to clearly side with the U.S. But also the U.S. Can retaliate with high tariffs if these countries take a very clear stance with the Chinese. So it does them no benefit to pick a side right now. When we come to Vietnam's position, I think, yes, what I want to say is that these countries, they share that sentiment of dilemma. And they are adopting this wait-and-see approach. But when it comes to the clear positioning, I think we have to consider the domestic politics.
Yeah.
I mean, Southeast Asia is a huge region, and these countries, they are diverse in terms of their domestic politics. So Vietnam might take this stance right now. Cambodia, as I mentioned, Cambodia is very reliant on China for its infrastructure investment. So it's possible that Cambodia, if pressure by the U.S., may have to be a little more reliant or leaning towards the Chinese. Malaysia, well, even though the Malaysian trade minister has come out to say they will not retaliate. However, the Malaysian prime minister is known for having a not so good relationship with the U.S. for the U.S. support of Israel. So domestic politics, I think, will shape how these countries in the region respond.
Yeah, and Bill, my question to you is that at the current point, who do you think is feeling more pressure, Xi or Trump?
Well, most immediately, I think it would probably be Trump because, according to reporting just today out of Washington, he is feeling that his sanctions policy may not be working. Well, he's apparently said that he might have to adjust, for example, sanctions against China. We know that he is not, he's not that confident, I think, anymore overall about how sanctions policy, his tariff policies have worked against China. So I think he's under a bit of pressure, which you get from the remark, that he took it as personally a personal insult almost that there's a collaboration between Vietnam
and China.
And so I think he's feeling the greater pressure, actually. He's still got to show that all of his policy initiatives in the 3 months or so that he's been in office have reaped success, and I don't think they have up till now. There's no clear, concrete benefits, I think, that he can show for his tariff policy, for example.
So Christina mentioned about those countries, those Southeast Asia countries, they also need to consider of their voters. So you're suggesting that currently it's really hard for Trump to convince the domestic voters in U.S.?
Well, I don't think domestic voters in the U.S. care all that much about Southeast Asia. And their memories of Southeast Asia, given the U.S. war in Vietnam, given our efforts in Cambodia, both of which didn't succeed in efforts to overturn communist regimes, there's not a whole lot of good memories for the U.S. with regard to Southeast Asia, because we fought in wars and struggles that really weren't successful, and many American soldiers died in those efforts. So I don't think that the American public pays that much attention to Southeast Asia. Not saying that's a good idea. In general, I would like to see Americans paying more attention overall to foreign policy. If that were the case, perhaps Trump wouldn't have been elected. But in any case, I think the onus right now is more on the Trump administration to show that it's going to make progress in some way in dealing with Southeast Asia.
And let's talk about Malaysia. When Xi Jinping he visited Malaysia, he publicly promoted this global South idea and call on Asian country to oppose this tariffs together. And after Xi wrapped up his 3-nation tour, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi he declared that the globalization has entered an Asian moment, with China as the key driver. So, Christina, how do you interpret China's this rhetoric?
Well, the term or the phrase, the East is rising and the West is declining, I think it became like an official rhetoric in 2021 during the height of the COVID. And that was because China wants to project to the world that China successfully combated against COVID. And it also reflects Xi Jinping's belief that ultimately China, as the representative of the East, will triumph over the U.S. and the U.S.-led system. So I think Wang Yi's shift from that phrase to the one that you just mentioned, I think it shows that China would like to portray itself as a responsible player in the current global trading order.
How convincing do you think this rhetoric is?
It may not be that convincing because, China does have a track record of using economic coercions, for example, against us. In Taiwan, also I can think of Australia as another example. So but it's working hard to shift that image because the Chinese definitely wants to paint the U.S. As the one that is irresponsible. As the Trump administration enacted or threatened to impose global tariffs. I think that is an indication, or China would like to use that to tell the world that, hey, the U.S. is the one breaking the liberal order that it used to uphold, or it wants the rest of the world to adhere to.
So the U.S. wants to tell the world that China is the troublemaker, but China is trying to tell the world that U.S. is the troublemaker. Okay, Bill, could you share with us how the U.S. foreign policy, foreign goals and strategies in Southeast Asia have evolved over the years, and how would you assess the current U.S. foreign policy in this region?
Well, I think the U.S., given in my lifetime, the wars that were fought there, the U.S., I think, came to think of this Southeast Asia as an area of the world which was sort of a U.S. domain in some ways, particularly because of our relationship with the Philippines as well as with other countries in Asia, with South Korea. But I think part of what's going on now is I think China's saying, no, this is our part of the world, and we're going to be deciding what goes on here. So I think there's a bit of a geostrategic struggle about who really should be dominant in this part of the world, in that part of the world. So I think the U.S. strategy now is sort of a departure because it all seems to be economically determined.
Yes.
In the past, it was all about geostrategic concerns. Now it seems to be simply about, from President Trump's point of view, where can we get the most economic benefit? Where can we earn the most? So I think that's a big shift geostrategically, that you're primarily worried about the economy. And with tariffs, I don't think it's going to be a very successful policy because tariffs up till now have not really succeeded in, for example, helping the U.S. economy. It remains to be seen, I suppose you could say. They haven't been in effect long enough. But just imposing tariffs upon tariffs and then finding you have to adjust them and reverse them. Talk now about cutting back on some of the tariffs on China, shows that I think there's an awareness maybe in the Trump administration that the tariff policy is not necessarily very effective.
Following on that, you mentioned about tariffs is not that effective. And during the first term of Trump, he also imposed a lot of tariffs on a lot of different nations. And after Biden administration, he actually maintained a lot of the tariffs.
Yeah.
So could you explain a little bit on that?
I can't explain that other than Biden, I guess, thought in some ways they were beneficial at the time and there was no reason to lift them, or he may have seen that it would be politically unpopular to do so. So I've never quite understood why they remained, other than I think he probably thought it was better than just lifting them.
The New York Times is saying that the strategy of Beijing is not to let these countries to choose China, but to prevent them from aligning with the U.S. What do you think about this analysis?
Well, I think it's probably true. I kind of agree that if China succeeds in not pushing the countries in Southeast Asia to the side of the U.S., then it's considered successful. But I think, overall, I think for these countries in Southeast Asia, they will have kind of a reservation for both the U.S. and China, because I talked about I mentioned this economic coercion. These are tactics used by both China and now the U.S.
Yeah.
So for these countries, neither the U.S. nor China seems trustworthy or reliable. And I think so far we are observing signs of countries in Southeast Asia to kind of come up with a strategically diversification strategy. So I know there are news about ASEAN, or Malaysia, I think, is the country that said, ASEAN should come up with a collective response.
But that's hard for
it is
ASEAN country to do
difficult,
it.
but I think that shows this intention. And also another news is that the Japanese Prime Minister, he announced that he's going to visit Philippines and Vietnam, I think countries in Southeast Asia, to talk about how they together could deal with the tariffs. So again, I think for those countries, the response now is, again, not to pick the side, either side, but to come up with ways, to diversify the risk.
And Bill, do you think Xi Jinping, through this trip, he succeeded in letting those countries not to choose China, but rather to not align with the U.S.?
I think so. I think that was probably the proclivity of these countries in the first place, as we've discussed, that it wouldn't be smart to align too closely with either the United States or with China, but rather seek a middle path.
What could be a middle path?
Well, a way, just strike the distance between the United States and China, sort of play both sides against the middle, is what I meant to say. So I think it's a positive indication that Japan is taking more of an interest in Southeast Asia, because it seems, I think, in many ways to be a less self-interested party. And I think that's a positive thing for the Southeast Asian countries. It's a more benign actor in any scenario. I think also, I think it would be helpful, actually, if other countries would also show some more interest in Southeast Asia as well, so that there are alternatives either to the U.S. way or the China way.
Taiwan has actually shown out interest to Southeast Asia. And as China is seeking to expand its influence across the global South and Southeast Asia region, and with U.S. tariff war continue to unfolding, what are the implications for Taiwan, Christina?
I think for Taiwan, well, the business people in Taiwan, they may feel the pressure to maybe they will have to relocate.
Yes.
But I think so far, relocation is very hard to achieve in the short term. So what I suspect that given that the U.S. tariffs are put on hold for 90 days, that might provide some relief to some business in Taiwanese business in Vietnam. So they might expect, or they hope that eventually the tariffs, if cannot be totally avoided, will be reduced.
Yes.
But there's probably also talks among, or attempts by these Taiwanese business in Vietnam maybe to coordinate with the other suppliers in the supply chain as to kind of diffuse the risk, or to share the burden. And
you mean building an alliance for business?
Or some of them may just end up, passing the cost down to the consumers. So they are considered different responses.
Yes.
But when it comes to if they should relocate, I think so far the answer is probably not, because it's just too costly to do so right now. And given right now the atmosphere,
unpredictable.
It's too unpredictable. If they relocate to another country, what if the U.S. decides to
impose another tariff on that
I mean, given what happened, it's very likely. So for them, maybe the better way is to just stay and wait and see, and try to again diversify the risk by working together with other partners or other companies.
And Bill, how would you recommend Taiwanese government to navigate this broader Indo-Pacific dynamic?
Well, I think it's a great opportunity for Taiwan as a benign actor in Asia, a non-threatening actor,
Yes.
To seize the opportunity to try to improve its relationship with Southeast Asian countries. I think, Taiwan is not a threat to any of them. It's not going to impose sanctions on any of them. Taiwan has a great deal to offer. whether it's in advanced technology or agriculture even, techniques and so forth. So I would like to see Taiwan proudly sort of step forward and look for playing a bigger role in Southeast Asia and making already what are probably friends, better friends.
Yeah. And we have this new southbound policy. Christina, is there any country that you would recommend Taiwan to prioritize, or there's any aspects of this new southbound policy that you think we can put more focus on?
I would say Vietnam is one, I mean,
Yes.
which already has a lot of the presence of Taiwanese business. Indonesia could be another option because it's huge country with
Yes.
a great deal of influence and has a lot of natural resources. And I teach at a local university, and I do have a lot of Indonesian students attending my class, and they're very smart, intelligent. And so I think when Bill mentioned Taiwan could contribute more to the economy in Southeast Asia, I think of semiconductor, and semiconductor for Taiwan is a huge advantage.
Yes.
And I think there could be some collaborations between Taiwan and the countries in Southeast Asia when it comes to education. So, training, education for the talents, young talents in those countries could be something that we consider.
Thank you, Christina and Bill, for your great insights, and we will definitely continue to monitor the developments of this tariff war. If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up, and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching our show today. Stay safe and see you next time.